I'm going to finish up with a few thoughts about the maintenance quality system and the equine injury database. So really the question is, regardless of whether it's racing or other equestrian sports, where do we go next? The status quo is unacceptable. This doesn't obviously limit us to surfaces, medication, whips, and our other risk factors. So if we look at that, it's very visible, these things that are happening, and some of these factors are controlled only by the horseman. Pre-race exams and surfaces are two of the things that can affect the safety of every participant in a race or an event. Really what's at risk is your name in the paper or an injured rider. The name in the paper is a risk to the business, but an injured rider, or even worse, can be a huge risk to the overall industry. It happens everywhere. There's some people who have very periodically looked at this and said that it's a North American problem, but certainly the fiasco at Eagle Farm in Australia, or some of the questions that have arisen about soft going in other countries, have certainly raised the question. And the few years ago, when there was such an issue in New Zealand as far as having the rainy season, and they had quite broad criticism. It is possible to win over the critics, however. If we look in Joe Drape's article in January of 2015, on Friday after the death of You Take the Cake, with the Racing Services Testing Laboratory was able to respond and provide information. And that's really what Brian Jabelman was talking about, was the data from New York Racing Association. And the end result was neither trainers nor jockeys would blame the racetracks as the casualties have mounted. And at that point, other risk factors could be addressed. That doesn't mean that we can be complacent about the track surfaces. What it means is that we can continue to improve it, but look at all the different risk factors associated with it. The three ideas in the maintenance quality system were the flight certification, pre-flight inspection, and black box data recorder or instrumentation. But the most important thing is to learn from the data, respond to the weather, and understand the successes. The Jockey Club gift has helped us significantly for racing, for the pre-flight inspection. But as I mentioned, much of this is for synthetic and dirt, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done for turf. The steps that we do in the about prior to the design documentation is looking at the equipment that's available. We mentioned a lot about cultivation. Having the right cultivation equipment, the core aerator, and whatever other equipment is needed at the track is absolutely critical. Again, looking at this, the irrigation plant and the sufficiency of the irrigation system. Prior to each race meet, testing the composition, we perform ground penetrating radar on dirt and synthetic tracks. We've looked more and more at looking at composition testing and other route depth evaluation of the turf tracks. This has been facilitated by the availability of this equipment from the Jockey Club. And then the daily tracking and measurements, which Brian Jabelman specifically talked about, the cushion measurements, the moisture measurements on the dirt and the turf, and logging the equipment on dirt, turf, and synthetic. This is the most difficult, but also the most important. A lot of tracks have committed the resources. We look at Oaklawn, Keeneland, Fairgrounds, Churchill, the Naira tracks. There's significant effort that's been committed to that, but it's just a manual effort. It's a lot of work. We also see it outside of the United States. Moronius in Uruguay has also adopted the required testing. Peter mentioned a little bit about the prototype of the automation of the mesh network. This will allow us to track both the equipment, measure the devices, and look at the conditions on the track. But the key to this data, if in this case, real-time moisture content from a dirt track, is that it go to the maintenance quality system, because if the data is not accessible in a way that we can look at what the risk factors are, it makes it much more difficult to improve. Where we are, the Jockey Club has provided support for pre-meet inspection. The database function is being rebuilt by the Jockey Club, and we're dependent then, however, on track staffing and commitment. We need work. We need the airplane black box, automated measurement of track conditions during racing, and complete information for incident investigation. What we really need is improved data quality, and then this data can be linked to the equine injury database. So what we've got is a decade of data on the OBST, weather stations, ground penetrating radar, and GPS and water. And what have we learned? Water, water, water. This is the water, both getting the water off, allowing the water to penetrate to the root system, and irrigating when you're during a dry spell. The drainage of the turf track, such as the new efforts that are going on in Kentucky, are absolutely critical to increasing turf racing, and also the upgrades of the irrigation systems. So where are we going with this? Not only can we use this to understand and better develop our racing surface decision making, but we can also look at what are the conditions for being off the turf. What level of rainfall is recovery? What time periods can you recover and be safely on the turf or an open or a sealed dirt track? And looking at the moisture content of the track and optimizing that both for growth as well as for safety. This needs to be done as a part of a monthly review, as a part of discussion between the superintendent and the equine medical directors. So the critical question, you heard from Allison and Lars talking about the critical question about does it perform well? That's the maintenance quality system and the rider's perception. But we also need to look at the epidemiology, which is the equine injury database. A lot of the equestrian sports outside of racing do not have comprehensive injury data. And a part of this will have to be to improve the epidemiological data that's available outside of horse racing. Best practices we can learn from improve. We can improve and develop this culture of data. I want to acknowledge the supporters of the work I've done, the Jockey Club, Keeneland, Naira, Churchill, and First Racing, as well as Breeders' Cup. But I also want to acknowledge all the effort that's gone into these last 3 sessions from the Equine Sports Turfgrass Alliance, University of Kentucky, Racing Surfaces Testing Laboratory, and the National Thoroughbred Racing Association. This session was sponsored by Equinox Racing, Horseman's Track and Equipment, John Deere, and Duralock. Please feel free to contact the speakers with questions.
This is Karen, and this is her land. She's been here a long time, along with Mojo. The first fence post went up here. Now there's 5,000 of them. After the storm, she started the cleanup here. And when she needs some peace and quiet, she always finds it right here. This is more than just land, it's home. Karen runs with us on a John Deere 3E Series tractor, because who says a day's work has to take all day? Nothing runs like a deer. Search John Deere 3E Series for more.
Being a teenager and in high school and middle school is not easy for girls these days. And they get to come here, spend time working around the farm, spend time with the animals, and not feel that pressure until we go to horse shows. The first time I saw this land, I was about 12 years old. I came here with an old mentor. I fell in love with it as a little girl, and I said I was gonna own it one day. My mother, when I was 4 years old, put me on a little pony walking around the zoo. That was it for me. Love at first sight. Like any kid, when I was younger, I wanted to compete more in the Olympics and go Grand Prix and do things like that. But I put that all on the side and realized I had a different agenda in life. I've taught about 800 kids in this area. A typical day starts early in the morning with feeding the horses. Then usually we clean stalls. This is a daily chore, sometimes twice a day. I'm always on the tractor, mowing, spreading things around, you name it. This is a John Deere 3025P. I love my tractor. I couldn't live without it. I like to just relax and be left alone. I call it my husband. He's very reliable, and it doesn't argue. It's so easy to use. My 68-year-old mother has never driven anything like this before, and she was scared to death of it. And once she did, she loves it. She drives it all the time for me and helps me out around the farm. Being here in Florida, we deal with a lot of hurricanes, so it can be very stressful when we're in the path of one. That John Deere helps me so much. We go around picking up debris, moving, pushing things with the bucket. I always have an average of 50 students, so whenever there's a disaster that comes around, they're always here and they're ready to work. I call all my girls my kids. They're like part of my family, and they get scholarships for riding, and so we try to keep our sport here a little bit serious but fun. We go to the horse shows. It's great for them. Good, very nice. It teaches them a lot of sportsmanship, how to be more in charge and have more self-confidence. A little stronger on that. There. The parents tell me all the time, you are such a huge influence in our child's life. I love to share my experience with these girls and be able to steer them in a better path. Everybody always asks me, how do you keep doing this? I say, just the sheer passion of it. What am I gonna do? Get a condo on the beach somewhere? I'm happier here. I'm Karen Neese, and this is my land.